One thing that marks a pretty significant difference between traditional fairy beliefs, culturally specific fairy beliefs, and the sort of popular fairy beliefs of today that are based more in theosophy and the New Age movement has to do with whether you protect against fairies, keep them out of your home, or invite them into your home. And if we look, for example, at sort of the popular books of today on the subject, again, largely looking at neo-pagan aimed material, there is this idea that the good folk are guides, that they want to help us. You'll find this idea in an array of work by like John Matthews, for example, or R.J. Stewart. I have not read all of his material, but what I have read, there's this idea that you want to reach out and intentionally engage with these beings because they can be helpful to you as a human. Now, in contrast to that, if we look at Irish fairy belief, if we look at Scottish fairy belief, Welsh fairy belief, etc., there is a much stronger emphasis on protecting yourself from these beings. You do want to be respectful to them. There are situations and occasions where a human might interact with them, but that is sort of the exception to the rule. The rule is that you want to make sure that they are not too close. To sort of use a very rough analogy, if we think of bears, the more New Age influenced view, the more Theosophy influenced view, would say that bears are actually kind and gentle animals, that if we engage with them with intention, they can be very helpful around us somehow. This is a very rough analogy. Whereas in the traditional and culture specific views, the fairies, which would be bears in this example, are understood to be potentially helpful in certain ways, but also potentially dangerous, and that you are safer, particularly not having them in your personal space or areas. That it's good that they exist where they exist, but you don't want any crossover happening. Again, bears being a very rough analogy here. So if we look at traditional beliefs, we see this idea of using iron, using salt, using rowan and red thread, using these various things to sort of keep a safe distance from these beings. In contrast, if you look at, for example, DJ Conway's writing on fairies, not something I personally recommend, but if you look at that example, you see this idea of inviting them in and wanting them in your home. So very, very different beliefs between the two. And it's kind of important to understand that if you're interested in this subject.